Welcome to Building Contextualized API Specs, or One Size Does Not Fit All. Hi, my name is Boris Vernoff. I'm a part of the ADP Enterprise Architecture responsible for the API Governance Program. First of all, I would like to mention how much I appreciate the opportunity to present at a conference that is specifically dedicated to the API documentation, as I do believe that nowadays, when APIs are the foundation of any integration, as well as any digital transformation, the API specifications are quickly becoming a very important component of the company's public image. Many large companies, including ADP, expose a broad variety of capabilities targeted to different consumers. This session focuses on creating and exposing API specifications that are contextualized, or, in other words, tailored to the specific types of consumers as well as their entitlements. Many of you might be familiar with ADP as a company, as you're receiving your paychecks or tax forms with the ADP logo. But ADP has much broader spectrum of services. It serves many clients all over the world that includes millions of users and offers a broad variety of human capital and payroll solutions. It's a known fact that ADP's strength is its data. We used to joke that data is our middle name. That's what the D stands for. And indeed, ADP covers all areas of the workforce management, from job search to retirement, payroll, tax, benefits, etc. And naturally, that all pieces of the puzzle are connected through APIs. I would like to continue with the quote of Satya Nadella, Microsoft CEO. Every company is a software company. Every company is a digital organization. Many years ago, ADP started as a service company, literally delivering payroll documents to its customers. Before joining EA Function, I was a part of the ADP Innovation Labs, and that's where the API journey actually began. One of my colleagues was presenting at the conference, and when he introduced himself and his position, somebody from the audience asked, ADP Innovation Labs, huh? How can you put words innovation and ADP in the same sentence? Well, this was a company's perception at some point in the past, but over the past 10-15 years, the company has transformed from the service company using technology into the technology company providing services. As a software company providing services, ADP grew through acquisitions, which resulted in having many different products built on different platforms using different technology stacks. As a result, it became very difficult to integrate multiple products, so API Everything has become a natural motto of the company. Here's a high-level overview of the ADP API journey that started with data synchronization across multiple products. That was the first use of APIs. Then, ADP Mobile Solution was delivered in a very aggressive timeline and is constantly gaining popularity. Later, the APIs exposed externally enabled a direct access to ADP's data and capabilities, so the marketplace was born. And finally, each product has gone through a complete tech refresh or digital transformation to ensure that every product is API enabled. Now let's take a look at the company's service expansion. It all started with a handful of products or providers delivering data to mobile customers. Then the external exposure, direct API consumption via marketplace came into the picture. More and more customers belonging to different industries were interested in mobile solutions, as well as direct access to data and capabilities via APIs. The geographical landscape has expanded as well. Remember, 740,000 clients over 140 countries. And on the top of this already complicated picture, additional products and providers became available. Remember, we grew and keep growing through acquisitions. It's no secret that one of the main factors contributing to the overall success of any API program is the easiness of the API adoption, which in turn is mainly defined by the consistency of API contracts or maintaining similar look and feel to shorten the learning curve and thus increase the adoption rate. Indeed, the contract consistency is the key, but there are so many different use cases and consumer types. Partners serving multiple clients, direct clients who actually are consuming APIs directly from the company. Within each type of organization, there are developers who need to have access to the sandbox to try test and also need specific implementation details. There are business analysts looking for various usage scenarios to be able to address the specific requirements. And last but not least, there are product owners researching capabilities and thus looking for elaborate descriptions of APIs. So the question becomes, can the same specification be equally useful to different clients and also different types of users within each organization? Or, in other words, does one size fit all when it comes to the API specification? Let's try to find the answer and look at some of the challenges in the HCM, human capital management field, but I'm sure those challenges are applicable to all different fields. When we define a standard object or entity, its definition may need to be projected, both globally and regionally, to a specific industry, and possibly to a specific client, based on its size and the level of service. I don't mean to be too pragmatic, but most of the companies are in the business of making money, and monetizing APIs is becoming a sizable portion of many companies' revenue. Once we realize that there could be different contexts, it becomes clear that certain requirements can and will vary, and that includes applicability of data, constraints, validity of values, and different operations. Let's look how the different contexts could come into the picture. Different providers can offer different scale or flavor of service. The government rules and regulations will differ for different geopolitical regions. Thus, some attributes can become non-applicable or even prohibited by law. Different industries may require different emphasis, such as clock punching workers versus full-time, or companies offering special benefits for working in hazardous environments. And finally, the consumers can be internal or external, be a partner serving multiple clients or a direct client. These are just few basic pillars, and the context can certainly be granularized further. Let's take a look and refresh the main components of the API specifications. We at ADP use Open API Specs 3.0, formerly known as Swagger format, but it could be different standards such as RAML, for instance. This is used to define URIs, headers, parameters, responses, and descriptions for the entire specification, as well as the individual operations. I have to emphasize that API-first design approach is the main foundation of our API program. So the quality and usability of the API specifications have become a critical factor of success. Open API specs can also include extensions to support business rules, elaborate use cases, descriptions, references to additional documentations, models, sequence, interaction diagrams, etc. It's hard to argue that the main component of the API definition is the payload, typically described by the schema. Let's be realistic. Most of the industries are heavily regulated, and the data becomes not just an asset, but also a liability. So a simple payload validation against the schema can become the first level of defense and save you a lot of trouble. And last, but certainly not least, the examples illustrating the API usage. Honestly speaking, in many cases, the difference between a good and a bad specification can be meaningful real examples versus, I just threw some data together. Now, when the problem is identified, let's try to come up with a solution. Based on the extensive research and work here together with different user groups and subject matter experts, here are some of the basic pillars that we felt are needed to achieve our goal of offering certain level of customization without sacrificing the specification integrity. And those are dynamically updated context-aware developers portal. Access what is relevant to you. Tailored or contextualized API documentation presented to the specific users based on their entitlements and the current context. Centralized API specification, data store, or API registry, capable of generating API specifications on demand based on requested context and user entitlements. It's important to mention that API registry is also integrated into the infrastructure. That's how we did it. So the specs become one of the configuration sources to drive the integrations, providing functional authorizations to the API gateway and marketplace infrastructure, schemas to enable message validations and the gateway, and most importantly, at the enterprise service bus in case of asynchronous communications where performance impact of validation is not so critical. And also providing routing information to the gateway, since the gateway would need to define who the provider is. Here's a high-level diagram demonstrating the API portal access flow. The first step is authenticating of the user. If a partner is detected, the choice of context would be offered. Based on selected feature and requested context, the API provider would be identified by the API registry, and the user would be directed to the customized API portal, which also supports different access modes: editor, which is typically at the provider side, and the viewer, typically at the consumer side. And finally, here is some of the roles defined so far, which we'll review in details in the next slide. Those roles are API consumer, the client and partner, API designer, typically at the provider side, API architect, part of the center of enablement, and API registry admin. Let's take a closer look at the entitlements for each role. We'll start with the API consumer, who would be mostly reading the specs. Next, the partner organization, which can offer different services to different clients, potentially provided by different products, so the partner user can choose the context to work with. The API designer at the provider side, who in addition to reading should also be able to clone the existing canonical and possibly other that were already contextualized specs and define new, more granular context within its own provider space. It's important to note that within each organization, consumer, there could be different types of users. More technical and more business-oriented, who potentially could be interested in a different view of the same specification. More technical details versus more elaborate use case descriptions. The same applies to the API provider. The business analyst may edit the specification descriptions and summaries after a technical person completes the technical aspects. These sub-roles are not shown here, but they certainly kept in mind to allow for further fine-tuning the user experience. The API architect, whose main responsibility is to fully manage, create, and modify the canonical templates that customized specifications are based on, as well as maintaining the context if it's required. The API architect could also suggest adjustments to the existing contextualized specifications. We usually do it through the pull request using Bitbucket, but there could be different mechanisms. And last but not least is the administrator role. Let's remember that the API registry is a part of the overall infrastructure, and the specs drive the integrations. Thus, they're subject to weekly builds, QA certification, and deployment to different environments. So DevOps and CI/CD aspect become rather essential. So the role of administrator cannot be overstated. So we are ready to dive into the API specification contextualization, so let the fun begin. We'll start with creating a new context, assuming the canonical specification was already chosen. Once we select an API provider for a given feature, we can narrow the context to a certain geopolitical region and also certain industry if applicable. Few simple questions are answered and voila, a new context is created. Of course, the specs still need to be adjusted for a given context as per the next step message, which step message as titles, descriptions, schema adjustments, and other. Here's an example of how the dashboard showing multiple contexts could look like. The access entitlements are not really applied here, so all contexts are shown. Starting with the provider only, followed by the provider plus the region, and finally the canonical templates. The canonical version of the API specs is the one that should be used as a template to create a contextualized version. Technically, any version could be used as a template, but the canonical would be the most complete, as the existing contextualized specs may and will have limited representations, hidden operations, pruned schemas, updated descriptions, etc. Let's see what it means to contextualize an API specification. We start with selecting supported operations, since there are certain cases when different capabilities could be offered based on subscription or the level of service purchased. This step would also include updating descriptions and parameters, and header and parameter obligation could differ as well for different providers, especially setting defaults if missing. Usage scenarios. Often, business users are more interested in how a particular operation is integrated in a larger business process, so the scenarios allow for grouping requests and potentially different responses together. Here's the slide demonstrating the operation selection. You'll see a list of available operations on the left side and the selected operations on the right side. So very basic interface. The next screen allows for updating the operation descriptions. It's subject to review to ensure the original meaning is preserved. Since ADP grew through acquisitions, the companies were often acquired with their own customer base who would be used to certain terminology, and those companies have eventually became products. So different providers may use different names to refer to the same business terms, kind of synonyms. These synonyms would be defined in a business glossary, so the Center of Enablement reviewer could refer to it and ensure apples are not called oranges and vice versa. Here's the main specification title and description. Also, here is the API section and title section, which is a group title and description. And finally, here's the ability to update the operation title and operation description. This is the initial step of the scenario builder, where the scenario description can be entered or modified to describe a specific use case. This step allows for providing custom response examples for both successful and erroneous responses. The user would choose the response code applicable and the corresponding example files. Please note that examples are externalized into files, but as you'll see from the next slide, it is possible to paste a JSON content directly into the scenario definition. This screen offers a scenario overview that allows for viewing, editing, and also creating new scenarios. The middle pane lists the scenarios that are currently defined. The list of supported responses is presented on the left side, and the applicable response payload example is shown here. As I mentioned before, Here's an option to paste the content from the external source or download a particular example. There are more steps that might be needed to complete the API specification contextualization, but in the interest of time, let's jump to the most important part of the API definition, the payload schema contextualization. What you see here is one of the most elaborate schemas in the library. It's only partially shown. That represents the entire worker entity. We start with the selecting canonical schema as a basis. Then the user would select context, cherry pick relevant schema elements entities to reflect the actual implementations. And it should be noted that some entities are non-breakable as defined in the glossary. The user then would update descriptions, constraints, formats, ranges, and certain attributes cannot be overwritten as well, like pretty much like certain entities cannot be broken based on the business rules defined in the business glossary. Once the schema have been modified, it can be saved and associated with a given context, thus providing contextualized specification to the consumer. To conclude the overview, here are a couple of access management screens. This one shows the product access entitlement assigned to a given user or a group by an API registry administrator that would limit the access to certain products only. So it shows the products that are allowed and also the products that the user or a group will have no access to. Once the product access is assigned, the entitlements can be granularized further for a specific user. Assigned products that user having access to and the products that could potentially be assigned are also displayed here. And finally, here's an example of the customized or contextualized API specifications where we can see product or context, supported operations, currently defined scenarios, and custom summary. Going further, we can also see supported user roles, and assuming this is targeted to developers and or business analysts, the link to Postman collections to be able to test the API. Summary. The specs are the face of your API program, and often the entire program is judged or misjudged by the way how the specs look and most importantly how useful they are. While consistency of the API contracts is a very important success factor, the usage context could vary. So let me summarize the concepts of the API specs contextualization. Accept the fact that different consumers may require different views of the same API specifications, so specification content can potentially differ. API documentation portal can be made context-aware and reflect current user entitlements so that documentation will be tailored to address the specific consumer needs. API provider can define more than one flavor of the same specifications based on a predefined multiple contexts. And business terms and overall look and feel should be preserved. Remember, consistency is the key. However, looks like that as far as the API specification is concerned, one size does not fit all. This session has been pre-recorded as I'm not able to do the live presentation this time. I will be more than happy to take your questions via email or LinkedIn messaging and answer as soon as I can. Please see my contact here, and thank you very much again for giving me an opportunity to present at this conference.